This is Tim.
I'm Mulele.
And this is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim with Mulele in Tokyo on Skype. I've got a cough drop in my mouth, so it's really professional. We got a lot of ground to cover today. We've got a couple of comics, and Mulele has another topic to talk about related to publisher contracts. So first of all, the comics. So just by coincidence, they both happen to be kind of history related.
Yeah.
The first one is called A Light Before Darkness, written by Ken Mora, penciled by Cyrus Mescarcia. And I think I should be up front, so in case anyone happens to notice it, I'm not sure if they would even see this, but Ken did actually just today pledge to our Patreon. Which is not going to affect my review of this, but just to be upfront about it. So I was a little confused about this at first, about what it was. It turns out to be, I didn't realize actually until when I blurbed it in Deconstructing Comics the week before, I didn't actually realize what it was. So the main character in this is named Michelangelo, and he's a historical figure, but he's not that Michelangelo. This is Michelangelo or Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio, who lived about a century after the more famous Michelangelo. But he was also an artist. That's what makes it more confusing. Another Italian painter. But yeah, it's a 6-issue series about his life, basically. We usually say read 30 pages at least. I read the first issue and I thought, well, it's not quite 30 pages. But then I accidentally opened the third issue and I started reading that, and I got about halfway through, like, oh, I missed the second issue. So I read much of the second issue, but I didn't quite finish it. Actually, I did finish it, now that I think about it. It's just I've got it at the halfway point right here. But yeah, I found it pretty interesting story-wise. I didn't really give myself enough time here because I was doing other things yesterday and this morning and whatever. But I'd be interested in reading the whole thing as far as the story goes. And the art is reasonable. The thing that bothered me was the word balloons.
Yeah.
The word balloons, I mean, it's not so much our frequent complaint of I don't know what order to read them in. Occasionally I was confused about that, but it was more just they kind of draw too much attention to themselves.
Yeah.
And they kind of swoop around a lot, and in order, like when one person is talking and he has 3 different little bits of dialogue that run off into another panel, and they're like sneaking connections, from one balloon to the next. And one place where a sword cuts a balloon in half or pokes through a balloon, like it felt too much like a comedy. Doing that kind of thing, drawing attention to the form. And in issue 3, I saw a panel where, at the end of issue 2, he gets kicked in the chest by a horse. And he's, in bed suffering from that in issue 3, and he shouts in pain, and his shout is connected. The balloon has 2 different pointers coming out of it, pointing to him in different panels. And I wasn't sure how I was supposed to interpret that. Did he scream twice, or did he scream with himself in unison? I wasn't sure what to make of that. And those balloon stems are so long
Mm.
that it looks like it's almost part of the picture. It's like it just is distracting.
Mm.
But the rest of the comic, aside from that, was interesting, I thought. Oh, and one other thing we should mention. The Kickstarter supporters get cameos in the comic. In the last page of each issue, you can see the photos of the particular donors who were in this issue, and then what they pictures from the comic, frames from the comic of where they appeared. So you can say, oh, okay, that was this person. So that was kind of an interesting idea. But yeah, what did you think of it?
I find historical comics to be a bit difficult to get through. I read the first issue, and 28 pages, I fell asleep multiple times. Now, this has nothing to do with the quality of the artwork or the story. This is a personal problem. I don't know what you would call it, but for whatever reason, I just cannot keep myself from dropping lid on historical comics. It may also be that I'm just incredibly overworked this week. But as far as the comic itself goes, the artwork was pretty good. There were a couple of things that I thought were a little bit weird, though. The word balloons and the way they are positioned in the comic, yeah, they are a little overpowering, and they don't match the art style. The balloon stems, I think you call them.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I used to call them tails, but stems is also good.
That would work too.
Yeah, are too long. We don't need to know which corner of the mouth that it's pointing to. It just needs to point to that character. And yeah, they do kind of stretch and twist and wind around the page in ways that are just really not necessary. And I even find that there are some places where the word balloon placement avoids a blank space and cuts off the architecture of the panel itself. One particular one is page 6 of issue 1, where Michelangelo is beating up this guy for cheating at cards. And the last panel on the left, so I guess it would be the third panel, we have a lot of space for text on the side of the panel, but it's blank. We've got these two things that, one, they had to kind of crop the word balloon to fit around the guy's head, and then push the other word balloon over to the side. And I kind of see why they did it. They wanted to have like the flow of the words, but the words here don't need to overpower the artwork. The artwork is the main focus here.
Yeah, you're talking about that part where the stem between bits of dialogue is running right across his knees.
Yeah, and
it sort of like makes a separation between the characters that shouldn't really be there.
Yeah, and I think the letterer wanted where Michelangelo cuts off that dialogue and says enough. He wanted that to be kind of dramatic and that's fine and dynamic for a comic that has that planned into the architecture of the scene, but this doesn't, and so it comes off as the artist giving his work, and then the letterer ignoring a lot of that compositionally and just doing their own thing, which maybe sets a certain flow but runs contrary to the artwork often. And I thought that it was a little bit unfortunate.
Yeah.
The lettering itself is not bad. It follows all of the rules of lettering. It's just the few bits here and there, and maybe just isn't right for this comic. But another thing on this page about the artwork itself, in the first panel, you can see where the bleed lines are marked. And I can't understand why.
Oh, yeah.
It's very distracting, and it runs through all of the artwork. On every page, you can see those bleed lines and crop marks, and it's like, why? I can understand if the penciler's work is what you wanted to preserve, but you have to make adjustments for that. And one of them is to not work on paper that's pre-ruled. Design your own panels on blank paper. Rule your own papers. But here, it's very bad. And especially in that page, it was very noticeable.
Okay.
Now, the story was a little bit confusing for me at the beginning. I wasn't exactly sure what was going on or who these people were or what they were on about.
Well, yeah, I like mentioned, I was confused too, and I actually had to look at the email that was sent to me because the comic itself isn't very clear. If you don't know this artist and you know that other artist named Michelangelo, it's easy to get confused. And I was thinking, oh, this must be him. And I was looking up that Michelangelo on Wikipedia. I was like, no, the years don't line up. This is 100 years later.
My question here is, reading issue 1, I didn't quite understand what the thrust of the story was. There seemed to be no direction other than just to tell this person's life. There's no sense of what he wants to do, what he wants to achieve, other than leave the city because he's gay and rip people off because it's convenient. And I regardless of the historical importance of the figure, the story itself must be compelling, not because it's about this person, but because the story is compelling. And in this first issue, I'm kind of not seeing it. Was there something more to it in subsequent issues?
Yeah, well, in 2, it's apparently years later. It's a little bit unclear. I mean, it doesn't. What does it say at the beginning of issue 2?
Okay,
but
sorry,
yeah, I mean, it's much later. We don't pick up from that part.
Okay,
it's
1601. Okay, issue 1 ends in 1593.
Yeah, so I didn't really, from reading 2 and part of 3, I didn't really see any connection to 1. I'm not really sure why 1 is there. I mean, it's at best it's just a self-contained story. I think I don't see the connection. I mean, of course I didn't read all 6, but
yeah, that's a bit of a problem, and it's less of a problem if you are selling it as a completed graphic novel, 1 book, because the person is in and they're in to the end.
Yeah.
But if you have to bridge it across several issues, if you're doing floppies, then you should have some tissue that has a want to be connected to something.
Yeah, some through line.
Exactly. So not seeing the through line here, and also hearing your inability to kind of comprehend where the story is going, you have to be interested in the character before you read the story. And being new to this, to not only to this painter but also to this situation, it's a bit of a reach for me. And that's the problem that I have with it. Not so much the artwork, not so much even the word balloon placement. The biggest thing is I'm not sure what they want to say with this.
Yeah, I guess somebody. I mean, apparently Ken Mora thought it was an interesting story, but I think he needs to do something at the beginning to sort of convince us of that. I don't know. I mean, you have to kind of go through the whole thing, and okay, it's interesting. I mean, I think it gets better in the second issue. So, but I think he needs to sell the first issue a little better in terms of appealing to us.
Yeah. No. At the end of the story, at the beginning of the book of issue 1, they say specifically that this was an exclusive premiere printing edition limited to 70 issues for Kickstarter patrons and the publication's initial supporters. There will be no further printings of this issue before 2016, which is kind of curious. Only in that I understand that you want to give something kind of special to the people that supported you. And I do that with my Kickstarters. I throw in little extra bits and pieces, whatever I've got kind of going around my studio at the time. But the idea that this was limited to 70 and then will be reprinted later, I kind of think you don't need to reprint it in the same way. You can actually just put it up as one book. Especially since now it seems that all the issues are done. And that would serve this book much better than splitting it up.
I'm rethinking what I said a few minutes ago. So, because, going into it, I wasn't aware that it was historical at all.
Oh, okay.
Because once I started seeing Michelangelo mentioned, then I looking at Wikipedia and the years not matching up. Then I looked at the email more closely.
Right.
So, if you go into it thinking this is fiction, and from just picking up the book, there's no reason not to think that, because it doesn't tout itself as nonfiction on the cover or anything. I mean, certainly the opening scene catches your attention because, it's somebody being burned at the stake for being a sodomite. So, I guess, it is interesting that way. It's just like, it's kind of, but it doesn't, if you come at it that way, it doesn't really need to be historical.
Well, that scene is actually quite compelling. And it sets a very harsh tone for why he has to leave that city, why he has to leave Milan. But I don't know that there's anything that goes beyond it. The incident of the guy having to kill his lover because he's being burned alive, it's a hard situation, but doesn't kind of push through the rest of the story. Any of the emotional turmoil. It just sets up homosexuality is persecuted this time. Homosexuals are persecuted at this time and burned at the stake if they're caught. And so that's all it sets up. They leave the city, but the character doesn't try to hide his sexuality. Doesn't seem to have too much of a sadness beyond a page or two after he kills his lover. And so it kind of makes me wonder why this is so important that it would be put at the front of the book. And if there's some callback to it in issue 3, sure, but I didn't get that far, and that's the problem. There's no declaration of intent for any of these characters. They don't really have agency because they're not trying to do anything.
By the way, well, as both Wikipedia and the later issues of the comic tell us, he was actually apparently bisexual.
Okay.
Because yeah, he does get it on with some women in the later issues. But yeah, his gate swung both ways apparently.
Okay. That doubles the chance for a date. But
Yeah.
um, but unless you know the story already, the story itself is not compelling, and
Hmm.
that's kind of my takeaway.
Okay, so the other book, now that was like a biography. This is about a historical event. The Satsuma Rebellion is the title of the book, named after an event here in Japan.
Mm,
Uh, Written by Sean Michael Wilson, who, well, he's been on the show before, and we've talked about some of his work before on
mm,
critiquing comics. And if you remember, the Big Ugly Robot Press book, Once Upon a Time in Morningside,
mm,
which was a very different kind of story from this. That was more a personal memory, where this is a big historical event. And the artist is Akiko Shimojima, who I know he's worked with before also. In fact, I remember
mm.
both of them being at Kaigai Manga Festa the first time we went in 2013. And I talked to both of them on the podcast then.
Mm.
So in the first book, since it's a biography, I mean, we're pretty close to the characters. Where in this book, and it's not novelized at all. It's pretty much just a straight historical narrative. I think it comes off. I mean, I think it's well done. I think it's interesting if you're interested in Japan, and the art is good. But I was wondering if he might have, if he had more kind of done it in more of a personal way, like pick out some particular characters, like on a TV miniseries or a movie or something, where they would, maybe fictionalize it a little bit, but more dramatize it rather than just sort of explaining what happened. And he does. They take advantage of the comic aspect, the comic book aspect of it in some places where some events are without narration, just the action is actually happening. But I could have used a little more of that. It seemed at a bit of a remove a lot of the way through, where it's just drawings and captions.
Mm. Well, it seems that he's going for more of a deconstruction or an explanation of Japan as a character, rather than getting into individual people.
Mm-hmm.
If he focuses on the people and gets to their personal point of view, then you kind of fall into the same problem that I had with the last one, which is, well, why is this important? Why are we seeing this? But the writer of this book, from the first page, basically gets to it. It says there are three distinct Japans in existence side by side today. And from that point, jumps off into the story. And I think that setup is enough to start. For me, again, historical drama is difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Now, truth be told, I forgot to read this one, so I had to make poor Tim wait while I read through it. But even speed reading it through, I dropped lid once, and this is not to say that it is bad or boring at all, but just that, again, it's not for me. Historical dramas are just, I'm out. Even though I sometimes do some samurai stories. Um, but those are fictions and flights of fancy. This is telling the actual story, the actual events of the period.
Mm-hmm.
And I see it more of a discussion as to why Japan is the way it is today, or where it's at, how it led to this point.
Right, yeah. As someone who's lived here for 29 years, I was able to kind of make connections between things that happened then and like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, now I kind of understand what happened there. And I don't know that it ever occurred to me before that the reason that Germany and other European countries, had so much influence was because the U.S. was distracted with its own civil war.
Yeah.
Even though we were the ones who opened up Japan in the 1850s, then, come the 1860s, then, we're not that interested in international stuff.
Well, we're busy. There is a bit of that. Having lived here for 27 years, I'm very interested in the knowledge, but reading through the comic itself, I don't know. I'm not that much of a reader anyway, but the narrative that is set up, or not the narrative, but the way it is told is compelling. It is very straightforward, not really dry. I think if it were just a narrative, it would be very dry, but the art style actually kind of keeps it fresh. I actually quite liked the illustration here. Mm-hmm. Very professional. The backgrounds were incredible. Some of the architecture and other non-human aspects are incredibly detailed. The characters themselves are somewhat simply drawn, but that's typical for Japanese manga style. But it is pretty gorgeous.
Yeah.
I quite liked it.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a lot of moments for me. But again, only because I'm living here.
Yeah, you have to come into this with a pre-existing interest in Japan. Otherwise, yeah, you'll probably check out after a couple pages.
Yeah. That is. I do not live in Italy, so for the last book, yeah, I checked out after a couple of pages. Yeah. But no, I'm actually artistically, it's very satisfying. There's nothing that looks like a half measure. A style was established, and the follow through is incredible. You can see the hard work and the diligence. You can see the planning, and everything is done very. The word would be purposefully. There's nothing that seems like a guess. Yeah, no half measures here.
Yeah, right. It looks very professional, and it is coming out from North Atlantic Books in California. This is a publisher. This is not a self-published or webcomic thing or something, and it it looks like typical published Japanese manga artwork. So
it's a professional job, and it looks that way. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I see professional jobs that don't look professional, or I see amateur jobs that look very professional. But I think this is a professional job.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, there's really not that much to say about it. It's just, if you're interested in Japan, it is good. If you're not interested in Japan, it'll be a bit of a tough read. Yeah. Right. Or if you're intellectually curious about Japan, then go for it.
Right. Yeah. At least a pre-existing interest, if not knowledge of Japan. But yeah, I think it would be tough to draw in someone to this book who isn't interested in Japan.
Yeah, I think it's the lack of focus on any particular person, which might make it a little bit hard to connect to. But I mean, you and I, like we said, we're connected to the country itself, so it's fine.
Yeah. Okay, so now, Mulele, the floor is yours.
Okay, so a couple days ago, a friend of mine who had been kind of talking to this company, and my friend and the company will both kind of remain nameless. And if I slip up, Tim, please put a beep over somewhere
All right.
or just chop it.
Okay.
But anyway, a friend of mine was kind of talking to this company to do some artwork for them. And actually, negotiations were kind of long and hard. I shouldn't say negotiations, but just kind of getting their shit together. Now, I don't know whose shit was not together. Was it the company or my friend? But it took a while to kind of work out that, yes, let's work together, and here's your contract. Anyway, my friend received the contract a couple days ago, and he was not too comfortable with some of the stipulations in the contract, and was thinking to negotiate with them just a little bit on this, which is always a good idea. I mean, a contract is not a sign or fuck off situation. A contract is a set of rules by which both parties would understand their working relationship in detail. That's all it is. To understand the rules of it so there's no confusion. If you are confused about it, then you need to talk to either some legal counsel, which, by the way, I'm not. So don't take this as legal advice, but take this as an artist with a bit of experience talking shit. Or you need to at least bounce some ideas off of another person that you know and trust. So my friend bounced this off of me, and that's why I'm now talking about it. The first point that he was concerned about was that there's a line in here that says that the company could use my friend's likeness and name and any other information they could find about my friend for advertising. And some people would say that that's great. But what it means is that if the company finds like a Facebook post, or if they find a relative's web page, that they would actually be able to use that information, that picture, to advertise and promote any project that you were involved in. Some of those pictures, maybe you like, maybe you don't like them, but that doesn't matter because it's up to the company to decide whether or not it's worth using, which is already a point of control that my friend didn't want to give up. So this was kind of his first little, I'm not sure about this.
And your friend is an artist, right?
Yeah. My friend is an artist.
As opposed to a writer, or is he doing both on this project?
On this project, he was going to do both art and story. So my friend sends it to me, and I start looking at it, and that was kind of buried way down at the bottom of the contract. Mind you, this contract is like 20 pages, but this is a work for hire contract, and work for hire contracts in general are considered not so good because the idea is that you give up the copyright of whatever you're working on, especially if you're the writer and creator of that property. Why would you give up the rights to that thing? So to kind of placate any artist who has a thing about that, their first sentence in the contract is not first sentence, their first line under the first paragraph in the contract is, for anything that you produce for this company, you will retain the rights. Pretty straightforward. I mean, that's not the exact wording, but it's a very nice gesture. You'll retain the rights to whatever you create, so don't worry about it. It's your property. But directly under that, in the same paragraph even, it says, nevertheless, by submitting, uploading, posting, or displaying content on or through the services, you hereby grant the company a worldwide, perpetual, irrevocable, non-exclusive, royalty-free, and fully paid-up license, with the right to sub-license at multiple levels to use, copy, reproduce, process, adapt, modify, edit, publish, publicly display, transmit, and distribute your content, in whole or in part, in any and all forms of media and by any and all methods of distribution and transmission now known or later developed.
Wow.
So what this essentially does is, yes, you have the copyright of your character. For example, let's use my character, for example, Elvis. It's a dead cat. I created a couple of years ago. Yeah, it's like a spoiler for page 4. But, so I created Elvis, and if I were to do that with this company, I would still be the owner of Elvis, but that company would have the right to use Elvis now and forever, and would also be able to make more content, because it says modify, edit, publish, adapt, modify, and edit. And I think that this is so overreaching that it could in fact include other artists coming in to use that character to make new adventures to gain further profits if that character is popular.
Yeah, it sounds like it covers pretty much anything they might want to do.
Well, yeah, it's so overreaching that, it means that they essentially control the copyright. Now, it says at the top that I own the copyright. Yes, that's true. But I cannot enforce any part of that copyright against them because of this contract, which means as a company with the means of distribution above my own at this current point in time, would be able to really push the character forward. But since everything's been paid in full under this contract, I would receive no money from any future anything that they made. Mm-hmm. And if I wanted to draw my own character, I'm totally fine to do that. It is my character. I do have that right. And I could even publish with another company that character. But a lot of companies don't want to do business that way. Yeah. So if I sell Elvis to this company, and then later Dark Horse or DC or Image, whoever, wants to use that character, but they see that already Company X is using that character widely, they're not going to touch it. They're going to say, oh, it's that company's character. It's like, no, I own the copyright. And yes, you can print it, but it's like, we're in competition with Company X. Why would we do that? It's already out there. So it would be exclusively ours.
It doesn't do you any good to own the copyright.
Yeah, it does me no good. But on top of that, if I were to draw it myself and publish an online comic of that, it would be perceived by most people as fan art. So I'd be then making fan art of my own property, which is being held prisoner by another company. Mm-hmm. So that was kind of the first big explosion in my mind of, oh my God, this is bullshit. And that first paragraph is really, really crazy. I should say that, this may be saying quite a bit here, maybe a little too much, but I'm going to say it anyway because there's some other tricks here. This contract is being was made by a Japanese company. It's a registered KK company, which is Kabushiki Gaisha, registered in Japan. And companies registered in Japan need to provide contracts in Japanese, otherwise they are not legal. And I understand this from my own dealings with my school and my lawyer. The English contract is for the understanding of the foreigner involved, at least for the English schools. Mm-hmm. Now, this is not for an English school. This is for a company that does art for an artist, but the artist is a foreigner. So this contract technically is not legal in Japan. It doesn't have any binding anything. However, at the end of the contract, it says that all parts of any dispute will be handled by a neutral third party agreed upon by both the parties involved in the contract. If they can't agree within 60 days, then it goes to court. And any sort of legal action, arbitration, whatever, will be handled in New York. Which means if you are an artist living in Japan that does business with a company in Japan that has a contract with arbitration in New York, if you have a falling out and need to sue, you will have to go to New York to do this action. You will have to hire a lawyer to do this action in New York. And if you don't have those connections already, you're setting yourself up for a world of hurt. And I was kind of wondering about that, because why would this be necessary? Why would it be necessary for a Japanese company to set up a point of arbitration in their contract in New York?
And not even by any means the closest U.S. state to Japan.
Yeah. It would actually be the farthest.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I should address one thing here. The company that wrote this contract is not necessarily a bad agent, a bad actor. We don't know. But it's not worth the time or the money or the headaches to find out when the contract is written this way. It is setting up the artist for a difficult time at best. Now, I'm not going to talk about how much money the person was offered to do the job, but the price was incredibly low. In fact, criminally so. But this contract is so binding that it would put him into a kind of slave position to get the job done. And once the job is done, there's nothing for him to take away from it. There's no purpose to this other than the initial amount of money that they agreed upon. There's no back end here. There's nothing to say that you will continue any work with this company. There's nothing. There is also another couple of issues that I wanted to kind of point out here. In this contract, it says the contractor has the right to suggest a pen name, contractor being the artist, has the right to suggest a pen name in place of a legal name to the publisher, but it's at the sole discretion of the publisher whether or not to use this pen name, which means they can use whatever name that they feel they want to. Imagine that you do work for this company. You create an amazing character and an amazing story, and it just flies off the shelves. Everybody loves it. Everybody's buying a copy of this. It's the next Hellboy. They decide to use your real name or your pen name. It doesn't matter. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself because I'm still a little bit pissed off about this. But There is another part of this, and sorry for trying to find it on the fly, but here we go. Publisher shall credit contractor in a style and manner to be determined by publisher in their sole discretion, which means that they will give you credit if they want to give you credit. So let's say you do create the next Hellboy, and they decide that they don't want to have your name associated with that. They've got another artist who is a little bit more of a name person. They'll give that person credit if they want to instead. Or simply say that it is a creation of company X. And that's it. You're completely cut off from your own creation and no one will know. Because it's in the contract, they can do that. But of course, reversed, let's say you create this work, it's not really doing anything for them, so it just sits on their hard drive for a couple of years. Meanwhile, you build up your career and you go somewhere else and you build the next Hellboy somewhere else, or the next Superman, or the next Batman, whatever it is. It makes you a household name. And this company now has one property that you walked away from 10 years ago. But because you're famous and you signed this contract, they can now use that character and develop it using your actual name, which is now worth something, to say, hey, look at this person's creation. Oftentimes you see this with videos like Sylvester Stallone's first picture, and it shows like him in this grainy 70s movie still. I think he had like a nude scene in it. It was like softcore thing. And apparently he was homeless at the time when he filmed this and got like $200. At least that's what I think the story is. Anybody can correct me if I'm wrong. But anyway, because he didn't do it anonymously, he was trying to survive on the streets of New York. And since I've almost lost it a couple of times on the streets of Tokyo, I can imagine how hard that is. But because he was in that and later became famous, they'll now use his name to kind of make a buck off of the fact that he was in this softcore porn at the beginning of his career. I don't know how much money they made off of it, but they made enough to at least put it onto VHS or DVD a couple of times. So there's got to be something there. And this kind of thing will come up every time Stallone has a hit. For the next generation, it'll probably come out on Blu-ray. But anyway.
Well, yeah, and there are other stories like that too. Like, Madonna had nude photos from before she was famous that came out after she became famous, and on and on.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly that kind of thing. But I mean, there's a difference between this and an actual legit contract. Now, most of my experience with bigger companies is with Dark Horse, and so the contract that I signed for Mindgator, because it was originally put out through Dark Horse as Full Throttle. You can look it up. It came out in Dark Horse Presents. Like the last couple of issues before it ended its first run. The contract I got said that it was, I think, maybe two to 4 pages. I don't remember exactly how long, much shorter than this contract, but it said basically, you own the rights to this, it's yours. And in fact, in that magazine, the copyright says, copyright Mulele Jarvis. I guess it was 1999. And it in the contract itself, it says that, okay, we're going to hold the right to look at this property for whatever you develop in the future for the next 5 years. This doesn't mean that they hold the copyright. So if I say there's nothing else coming here, this is done, they don't have the right to then develop the property into something else for themselves. If I say no, that's the end. We just don't work together anymore. As it turned out, Dark Horse didn't ask for any other stories of Full Throttle. and I was kind of going through my own stuff. I just had a baby, or rather, my wife at the time did. I was just kind of looking at it. But I was kind of preoccupied with other shit. So for the next couple of years, I didn't really produce much of anything. I mean, I drew a couple of short stories that didn't see the light of day and will not, because I don't even know where that those drawings are anymore. But after 5 years was done, I said, okay, well, it's now completely my thing now, and I can take it wherever I want. So I started kind of redeveloping it and retooling it, which is now MindGator. Although it took me, instead of 5 years, it took me 15 years. But anyway, that stuff aside, a proper contract should be that. The copyright is yours, but that company would like to look at the next thing that you make. If they look at it and say, "No, pass," then fine, take it somewhere else. But if it's really a good a good character or a hot selling property, then of course they're going to want to invest more money into that, because they're going to be making more money from that. So yeah, they'll not pass. They'll say, yes, we'll do it, and you can negotiate your fee based on that, and that's a much healthier way to work. But still, these are when you look at a contract for the first time and you say, okay, I'm going to get X amount of money, and these are the things that I have to do. Understand what the contract is. Now, this contract, the way it's set up, they've separated all of the tricks and whatnot into different sections of the contract. So when you finally add A plus B plus C, you then realize that you have absolutely no rights in this, and these are the different ways that they can fuck you over. But if you just read it straight through, and each section is individual and not added together, it seems like, okay, well, I do keep my character. Okay, they're going to find a picture of me on Facebook and use that. And it doesn't sound that bad, but it is. And so just as a kind of warning to people in general, and specifically, I don't want to name this company because this is not the only company that does this kind of shit. There are a lot of companies that do this, and it's getting heavier and heavier. And it seems to be that the hallmark of entrepreneurship is ripping off other people. And for some reason, a lot of people think that ripping off the illustrator is the best, easiest way to make your money. And I don't know where that comes from or why. Maybe it's for the fact that artists, a lot of times when they're starting out, have really weak egos. They're shy, they're introverted, they draw a lot, they want recognition, but are happy with a thank you a lot of times. I've been there. And just to tell you what I said when Dark Horse first gave me my first job, I mean, I debuted there. I said, I showed my portfolio at San Diego Comic-Con in like 99. And the editor I was talking to, I forgot his name. Who's the editor? It might have been Mike Richardson.
I don't remember their names.
Yeah, but anyway, one of the big honchos at Dark Horse looked at it and said, okay, 8 pages. And I did a double take. I was like, what? So yeah, 8 pages. Develop an 8-page story and send it to me later. So, okay. And he gave me his business card, and that was it. And that's how I made my thing, my first debut. But after that meeting, I didn't know how much I was going to get paid. And I said, I could do it for free, and I'd be happy. Of course, now, 20 years later, I'm just like, fuck that. I'm getting paid. I mean, everybody's getting paid, so I'm going to get paid. But yeah, just a lot of companies are now beginning to write these kind of contracts, which will lock artists into shitty situations or steal their work from them because they feel that that's just the way now. I mean, I would really love to just out these guys, but it's not just them. And so as a public service announcement, in general, look out for these things. Anybody who wants to have the rights to the work, anybody who wants to pay you one time for worldwide distribution of something, consider this stuff. There are some situations where you'll say, okay, yeah, that's enough of a price for me to give up rights to this, or this is a good enough situation that I will do this. And that's fine. That's your choice. But you have to know what you're giving up, not find out later like, oh, shit, I could have had that, but I didn't because I signed this shitty contract. And it's kind of hard to know what traps you're getting into. So I'm making a recommendation for a book here. It's called The Graphic Artists Guild Handbook, Pricing and Ethical Guidelines, 15th edition. 15th edition is the one that came out April this year, April 2018. And I had a copy of this back in 2005, 2006. And yeah, it is a monster book. In Japan, it's like 5,000 yen. It's like $50. Amazon in America says $28.32 as its sale price. Now, I don't like Amazon and fuck Bezos, but if you are worried about the penny pinching and you want to get it on Amazon, get it. If you go to another bookstore and you get it there. But get a copy of this. Inside this book, there are example or sample contracts that you can photocopy as kind of boilerplate contracts. There is, of course, pricing lists, so you know if company X approaches you and says, can you do this drawing for us, or can you do this comic for us? You'll know what that's worth based on that company's distribution. So if you know how many books they're selling a month, or how big this project is supposed to be, how far the reach goes, this talks about that specifically in specific numbers and says this is the standard. Now, there are a lot of companies that will say, okay, if you want that standard, good luck and see you around, Mr. No Name. But it gives you a line to work around. If my friend had this book, then they would not have even considered the price that company X offered them. Mm-hmm. Now, of course, if you get approached by someone like Time Magazine to do a spot illustration or a half page or a full page, you're not in for $100. You're in for thousands of dollars. And knowing that helps you negotiate. And if Time Magazine comes to you and says, hey, we really like this illustration, we want to use it, and let's talk about this. Know where you're at. Know what the value of your work is. And negotiate accordingly. And so that's kind of the end of the rant. But just in general, shit is getting really rough. And that's part of the reason why I do a lot of self-publishing, is because, fuck these hacks. I cannot be bothered with this shit. I'd rather spend my own money and invest in myself and get what I can from sales at conventions and online, rather than, and Kickstarter, of course, rather than some company that thinks that they're a gatekeeper to my career. And so I should bend over backwards to give them my artwork for free without a copyright.
Say the name of that book again.
Graphic Artists Guild Handbook, Pricing and Ethical Guidelines, 15th edition.
Okay.
It's called the GAG Handbook, GAG.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mentioned to you before we started, one time when Steve Bissett was on the show, he was also talking about some of the worse and worse contracts that are coming to comics creators these days. So, yeah, you got to know what, keep yourself from getting cheated.
Yeah, I actually have had some problems with some comic book companies. A couple of years ago, there was a legit comic book company that came at me and said, "Hey, we'd like you to work on this project. Are you available?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's go." And it's like, "Okay, what's your price?" And I quoted them a price that Dark Horse would have given me. And he was like, "Well, see you around." I said, "Wait a minute, what's your budget here?" And we talked it over, and he talked me down quite a bit on the page rate, but I still took the job. And then without a contract or anything, they're just asking me for like little sketches here and little sketches there to kind of promote their side of some negotiation with some Hollywood company. And then I'm kind of like doing my other projects and shit. And then I come to find out that I'm off that project. Never got paid for those sketches, never got a call back to say, "Hey, look, buddy, it didn't work out." Now, several years later, that comic that they had originally hired me for is in print through their company with another artist. And I kind of look at that shit and just think, they were calling me up saying, "Hey, man, we need some, can you draw something? And like, we've got a meeting in about an hour." And it's like, what? And so I'm dropping all of my shit just to get them a sketch so they can use it in a meeting so they cannot pay me. And so now I look at that writer and that company, because those are the people that I was dealing with. And it's like, no, I'm not about you anymore. You can go fuck yourselves, and I'll be fine without you. But there's a lot of hinky shit out there, and you have to just step up and say, "Hey, my artwork is worth," or if you're a writer, "My writing is worth this. And if you cannot afford this, come back when you can. I'll still be here."
Okay, so we've gone on quite a while here, but yeah, I think that's worthwhile stuff. On social media, on Twitter, I'm at Decon Comics, and Mulele.
I'm at Mulele Redux on Twitter, Facebook, on Instagram. Sorry, one point about Facebook. In light of their scandals, I've been kind of rethinking my usage of that, and I'm pulling back just a little bit. So if I don't comment or answer something so quickly, hit me up on Twitter. Best way is just to email me. My email is fucking public for everyone to hit me up at mail@mulele.com. That's MAIL. It's not a cisgender masculine thing. It's just logic.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, and people can email me at mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and of course that's also the address to send your comic to us to critique. We'll read at least 30 pages of it, and then we'll talk about it here. So, till next time, this is Tim.
And Mulele.
And thanks for listening to Critiquing Comics. Next week on Deconstructing Comics, Promethea by Alan Moore and J.H. Williams. Kumar and Emmett discuss the Turn of the Millennium series.